Welcome, everyone, to the Curious Mind podcast. We have conversations sometimes about topics, therapies, spirituality, and today we have the topic of logotherapy and Viktor Frankl, which is a specific type of therapy. We will go into it. It is connected with existential topics and finding the meaning of and purpose of life. And Amit, you have suggested the topic. You are interested in these questions anyway. You see certain similarities to the way that I work, and you expressed the interest to discuss that with me. And for me, it was a good opportunity to read for the first time the classic book, which is historically the beginning of logotherapy and the literature about it. The founding figure of logotherapy is Viktor Frankl. He was Austrian, was born in the beginning of the 20th century. He was a socialist, he was a psychoanalyst, and he was Jewish, which probably was the main reason why he unfortunately also had to endure years in the concentration camp. He survived it, and shortly afterwards, I think in 1946, he wrote the first draft of the book that we want to discuss today, and which became quite an international bestseller. I don't know if it's that popular today still, but certainly in the previous generations, people who were interested in psychology and psychotherapy were aware of this book. And it is called in English, The Man's Search for Meaning, an Introduction into Logotherapy. The original German title is Trotzdem Ja zum Leben sagen, ein Psychologe lebt das Konzentrationslager, which means in English, to still say yes to life. A psychologist experiences the concentration camp. So it's quite a different title in English, in German than the translated meaning in English. But it's fair to say that the English title became the popular one, not so much the German one. Maybe this for a very short introduction, and I would hand it over to you, Amit, if you want to add something to the context of this publication and Frankl, and then lead over to some questions to start with.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. So yeah, I think you did the introduction, so that's perfect. So again, I read this, or I listened to this book on Audible, then I got really interested. So I ordered a copy because I wanted to go over some of the concepts that he has mentioned. Mm-hmm. And in terms of our podcast, so what we wanted to do, there's so much information in here and so much we can talk about, which we wouldn't be able to cover. But the way we want to start is I'll go through the aspects, as you said, in the German name of the book, to say yes to life even if they are going through suffering. I wanted to cover that part around faith and around suffering, and also around how can the entire population believe in God, their God, so much even after the suffering. So I wanted to cover that part, and then I wanted to get a little bit more into logotherapy and the meaning of life, and how Frankl has talked about three aspects in the meaning of life. Mm-hmm. And every now and then I'll touch upon where I believe, in working with you for the past 3 or more years, I feel that maybe you don't follow logotherapy, but it seems you're very close to the way he is working with his patients. Mm-hmm. So we'll do it in that way. Okay. All right, so with that, let's jump straight into it. My first question, which I am really curious to know, and I've talked to many other folks about it, and I've never gotten a good answer. So you are on the spot then for this talk. Great. So the question for you, Frankl in this book, he literally, the first part of the book, which is, I think 60% of the book is the first part, he goes over how and what really happened in the concentration camp. And, although it is extremely depressing reading it, and it really, makes you question the things you feel in life. For example, I live in a city where when a light rail or a tram goes by, I get bothered at night.
Yeah.
To people that you mentioned in concentration camp, where they're sharing one sheet to cover themselves at night across 6 or 9 people, and they were able to sleep in cold, with noise, and without food. And at that point, he is talking about how their belief in their God became stronger. And my question, sitting logically here now, again, I have no idea what they went through. I haven't been through that. I don't know anyone personally who has been through that. But sitting here, if I look at it and I'm like, okay, these people in the concentration camp, they were suffering such atrocities, and they were defining a meaning to life, or saying yes to life, as in the German title.
Yes.
Why would they not choose the easy path and just say, you know what, screw it, this is too much, let me just walk into the gas chamber and call it a day? Why were they still struggling? And how are they defining that struggle to say, this is the right thing to do, and this is how God has put me through the test? Like, is it just they're trying to find why they are in here and defining it, or and how is their faith getting stronger? So I'll stop here to see if we can dissect this.
Yes. Unfortunately, there is no simple answer, and we have to unpack that. Now, and for that, we have to go back to the historical context, both of the concentration camps and of Frankl writing it down. The writing process, as far as I understood, was a rather straightforward, spontaneous outpouring of his experiences and a report on it, which means that he did not have a scholarly ambition, or to discuss, all different kinds of eventualities and all different kinds of people. To put it differently, he simplified, and he oversimplified. And especially from the historical perspective. So when it comes to the description of the concentration camp, when it comes to the description of what people went through and how they reacted to it with faith and, hanging on to life and so on, this is not accurate. So we have to understand that what he described are certain cases that he singled out, and he wanted to exemplify a principle. For example, the principle of faith, for example, the principle of hanging on to life, of meaning of life, in order to make a point. So
one sec. So now,
yes.
Let me understand what you're saying. So what you're saying is that in his writing, and by the way, you're right, he finished this book in 9 days, unless I'm mistaken.
Right.
So from the start to finish, he wrote this book in 9 days. I couldn't stop reading it, so I read it nonstop. But when he talks about people who I think believed in suffering and found meaning in suffering, and people who grew their faith, are we saying that this was a minority, or maybe not even minority, a percentage of population?
Correct.
But are we saying that today in Judaism, there is some population which looks at it and does question, like I would question, that how can there be God if you have to go through such nightmares?
Yes, absolutely. So to give a bit more of a context, and there is, I can start with that. I believe that there are two sources of, I don't know how to put it, where he was not kind of honest enough, I feel, in writing the book. To ask you as a reader, and maybe not knowing too much of the historical details, did you get from the book in which concentration camp he was?
Yes, Auschwitz, and I've been there too. I personally was in Auschwitz twice, rather, and it was, to me, it was so depressing that I don't think there were any restaurants around it, but we didn't eat that day when we were there. It was massively depressing.
Yes.
So yeah,
I believe that. Okay, now, and this is a criticism that I have to him, and a criticism to the later editions. Maybe in the beginning it was not clear to him, but at least for the later editions, he was in Auschwitz for a few days. He spent most of it was for years in concentration camps, but it appears to the reader as if he spent most of his time in Auschwitz. Why? Because Auschwitz is, as far as I understood or read it, the only concentration camp that he mentions by name. In reality, he spent 2 years, so he was for about 3 years in concentration camps. He spent 2 of those years in Theresienstadt, which is in today's Czech Republic. And this was a concentration camp. Now, don't misunderstand me, all of them were horrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Theresienstadt was a propaganda concentration camp where they put prominent Jews to misdirect the population from seeing that there was an extermination going on. So this was a concentration camp that was presented as a model concentration camp, that of course, harsh living conditions and so on, but there was cultural programs and, working and so on, but it was not what Auschwitz was, which was a complete secret location that most people had no idea that it existed. It was run by the SS. Only purpose was basically, the main purpose was, especially in the last years, to just kill and exterminate as efficiently as possible. Theresienstadt, where Frankl spent most of his time in concentration camps, was not that. So when he mentions Auschwitz from his direct experiences, he refers to a few days that he spent there while he was transported to close to Munich, where he spent his last period in his concentration camp. So this is where I feel he's dishonest, or at least he's leaving out an important detail. And why, I don't know. Maybe Auschwitz was just such a kind of symbol of the concentration camp, kind of part of the Nazi Reich back then, that it felt like a slogan that he had to use. But this is not where most of his experiences come from. The second thing, a criticism that I would like to mention, is that it seems to the reader as if kind of this topic of purpose of life emerged from his concentration camp experience, even though he doesn't mention it kind of explicitly like that, but it seems to me. Whereas, in fact, he was a psychoanalyst, he was a doctor long before the war, and he started to work on the purpose of life with people already 10 years before, the Nazi Reich came out. So he came as a psychoanalyst, as a doctor who is already convinced of the importance of this purpose of life. With that, he already went to this experience of the Nazi Reich and the concentration camps. So kind of to find that then is not too much of a miracle, because if you're anyway inclined to see the existential aspects of life, of course, you will see it clearly in the concentration camps.
Right, but not to dispute that part, what you just said, but while he was in the camp, if I can, based on the readings, because I don't know anyone who knows him, right? Based on the reading, right? Yes. He did sacrifice, although he had a visa to leave Austria and get to US, he did sacrifice not going there. And he said that, that was a sacrifice so he could be with his ailing parents.
Yes.
At the same time, although he mentions that as a sacrifice, he did then also let his wife, who was pregnant, so he lost his wife and his, to-be born child in the concentration camp, right? So I'm not too sure about whether that's something to be proud of or not proud of, because you did, end up being with your parents, but you end up losing a kid who was not born and your wife. But he did do that, and then when he did come out, he didn't have any family. So I don't know how many people were able to bounce back like he did, or successfully maintained it. So I'm not too sure whether he had a meaning to life and he stuck with it, or whether it helped him because he already had a meaning to life, where he wanted to write a book, where he had a manuscript before he walked into the camp, and he wanted to go from there.
Oh, that I don't know at all, but I want to say it. I don't know if he had kind of a purpose of life. I can assume that he had kind of this topic that he applied to himself, but he already worked on that. So he worked on, he used it in therapy, basically. It was a topic that was interesting to him. So he did not discover the topic through the exposure to the concentration camp experience. He already had it as a topic.
He already had it. But then coming back to the main point. So, we had give and take, the numbers are about 6 million Jews and some other population who perished because of the whole Nazi effort, right?
Yeah.
Now, of the people who did survive, would you know, or is there a good way to know how many of them are really religious versus how many of them look at it and say, how can there be God if there are such atrocities easily being done by man on another man?
Yes, I mean, these things are difficult to investigate because, back then especially, there was no purpose or no way to systematically kind of ask people and so on. But I found an essay basically dealing with these questions by a scholar called Flavia Giuffra, where the title was "God Behind the Barbed Wire: An Inquiry into Jewish Faith and Practice in Auschwitz." I will leave a link to this paper below, and I will leave a link to another book, which I find is, if people are interested in kind of the real experience, especially of Auschwitz, it's called People in Auschwitz by Hermann Langbein, who spent many years in Auschwitz, and he was part of the resistance there. He was not Jewish. I think he was an inmate there as a socialist. And he was working in an office, basically. He was assisting a doctor there, and through that he had access to files and people, so he knew a lot. And he was an instrumental figure also afterwards in organizing the Auschwitz trials and so on. So he's very knowledgeable, and his report on how life looked like in Auschwitz and the aspects of faith, the aspects of suicide, and so on, are quite detailed and quite differentiated. So anyone who is interested in details about that, I would refer them to this literature. And this was also my source. And like I said in the beginning, it's quite differentiated. There were people who lost faith. There were suicides, even though in a much lower number than one would expect. Also much higher than in the general population, but that is no surprise at all. When it comes to faith, there were people who lost faith. There were people who found, let me make a bigger jump there. Faith and the belief in God is not, it's something that is more or less baked into the human software.
Baked into the human software from birth, or baked into the human software from the way they have been taught and they grew up?
Yeah, it's more than that. It's not just a social construct. It's people, humans, again and again have come up with the belief in supernatural entities and God, spirits, and so on, and it seems to belong to the fabric of the mind, and it's not just taught. It's not enough to assume that this is a social construct and that would, we would be able to get away with it. People again and again spontaneously create the belief in that. So keeping that in mind, it makes sense that if it's part of many people's kind of software, so to speak, that it will not just vanish because of experiences. If there's something, a stubborn willingness, a readiness to believe in a God, it makes sense that people will twist somehow their experiences so that they can still keep the belief in God. And one of these things, and one of the strategies, so to speak, that Jewish inmates did use was to construct a non-interventionist God, for example, meaning that there is a clear distinction between the realm of the divine and the realm of the God and the realm of man, and basically to say God exists, but it doesn't interfere in everything. This suffering here in the concentration camp, this suffering that we have to endure here as Jews, this is man-made, this is not God-made. This was one of the answers of people to, on the one hand, keep their faith, and on the other hand, to make it compatible with their experiences.
So is he saying man-made? So I think, again, not to jump into it, but he did mention in one of the places here that what he meant when he was defining it is that there is something more than what happens here. And what he's saying is, as men or as humans, our imagination or our mind is limited. So he gave an example of a chimpanzee. And he's like, if a chimpanzee is in a lab and he's getting poked 10 times a day, the chimpanzee may not realize, because he doesn't have the vision like humans do, he may not realize that his getting poked 10 times a day, although it's really painful for him, is for the bigger good, because we may be able to discover some medicine or some kind of a therapy through that. So there is something bigger. And what you were saying is, if let's say me as a human, I'm getting poked 10 times a day, or I'm put in a trial or something, then maybe my sacrifice would help a million others after me. So if you look at it, there is a bigger cause. And what he's saying is, what we should do is we should look at all our suffering and say, okay, maybe we don't understand it, but there is a bigger thing to it. I didn't 100% agree to it, although I agree on the medical aspect, what he was talking about. But as suffering that human goes through, sitting back and saying, okay, maybe there is something more to it. If there was, we would have already found out, I'm hoping. So it didn't resonate to me. I don't know what you think of that, and how his definition of believing in God, believing in a world outside of our world.
Well, I'm not there yet. I'm just describing that it was not, there was not a Jewish response to faith in concentration camps. There was a whole variety. There were people who lost faith. There were people who believed in a non-interventionist God. Orthodox, there apparently was a camp of Orthodox Jews who believed that this was a punishment by God as a reaction to Jews mingling with Gentiles, so to intermarriages. There were people who believed that there is kind of God intended them to witness, to keep them alive as witnesses, so that afterwards they can describe it to the world. So there was a whole range of.
So everyone came up with their own mening, is what you're telling me.
Right. So
to survive.
Maybe there were not a million ways of how to deal with that, but there were many categories, and it was not just, a typical Jewish response to it.
So basically what you're saying is it's about any man, any religion being thrown into a situation, and it's about the survival of that person. If they are willing to survive, they come up with, okay, I need to survive because I'm a witness to it and I need to go back and tell people, or I need to survive because, I'll meet my family after this, or whatever that reason might be.
Yes. Or another example, and there are many, many ways, right? Other people stayed alive as out of spite, apparently. Basically said, I will not do them the favor, those Nazis, to die on them now, or to commit suicide. I will survive, because I will not them break me. I will not let them break me, for example, which is a non-faith kind of response. It's kind of a faith-free response, which is still connected to purpose and meaning. But yes, I mean, overall, when we look at this whole spectrum, I think it's relatively fair to say that people who saw some purpose in their suffering, be it faith, be it secular, whatever it was, that it helped them to stay strong enough to make it. And that probably if someone lost faith, lost the meaning of life, that it was much less likely that they had anything to hold on and to see a reason to get up in the morning and to go to the drills, and people who didn't go to the drills were severely punished and killed and so on. So yes, it was an important element. Whatever the purpose was, it held them up.
That's interesting. Okay, so that makes sense. So basically, you kind of like answered both questions, and I'm going through what I wanted to discuss with you. So in terms of faith, what we are saying is it wasn't very apparent that, okay, these guys went in, they got punished, they came out with more faith in their religion. Some people did, some people didn't. Some people came out being upset. Some people came out saying, I'm going to kill other people as a result, right? So we had various reactions. Obviously, there's no good way to understand it, but you post those links, which we can review from an outsider's view into how they viewed the population which was in there. So we'll do that. And in terms of survival, what you answered was everyone probably had a different reaction. So some believed, like in case of Viktor Frankl, he believed that he is surviving, or his response to the atrocities is how he judged himself, as how he responds to life. And using that, he used that to survive, saying, no, I'm going to respond to it good, and I'm going to survive that way. Whereas other people could be spiked, other people could be, that God is punishing us, so we should go through the punishment, and so on and so forth. So it was all over the place. So
it was all over the place. And to give you just another demographic aspect, apparently, the suicide rates also depended on where the Jewish inmates came from, the concentration camp inmates. So apparently, Jews from the Netherlands, from Holland, were more prone to commit suicide, and also in earlier stages in Auschwitz, than Jews from Poland and the Czech Republic. Now, why that is, we don't know, but just something that comes to my mind. Maybe they were more used to harsh living conditions than maybe more well-off Jews from the Netherlands. But there were those differences, and just shows that everyone found himself thrown into those horrible circumstances, and everyone had to somehow come up with the motivation to go on. And it was not enough to copy and paste, to look at the next bunk inmate and to ask him, how do you survive? And he says, well, I believe that God has a plan for us. And then say, okay, let me believe that as well. No, everyone had the challenge to come up with something that fit or didn't to their circumstances there. So it's very fractured, very with a wide spectrum of responses that people came up with. And so this is something to keep in mind when one reads a report like Frankl's, to not think that there was a general approach, or
like a wide paintbrush approach. Okay, that makes sense. I think that is good. So then getting to the other part, right, where he is relating all this to meaning, where he's relating all this to which brings us into the logotherapy, right? So he made this one comment, and I'll read this comment verbatim, and that's something that maybe we can talk about for a couple of minutes on that. So in it says, it is we ourselves who must answer the question that life asks of us. And to these questions, we can only respond by being responsible for our existence.
Yes.
Does that make sense to you? It is we ourselves who must answer the question that life asks us. And what he's saying in here is, from what I read, when we sit on a Tuesday afternoon and we are like, oh, am I doing anything meaningful? Is this adding value to society? Does it even make sense? So in that sense, what he's saying is that we are not asking that question. He's saying that we are being asked that question by life. And to these questions, we can only respond by being responsible for our existence. That made no sense to me. And I tried to think about it for many, many days.
Yes.
So does it make sense to you and what it means?
Yeah, it does make sense to me when I see his approach in a way of thinking and a tradition that was much more prominent at the beginning of the 20th century, which were kind of the revolutions that came with existential philosophy and writers like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. And I think for an important aspect, and clearly, there was, people discussed these things. It was very prominent, the intellectuals, the avant-garde. It was something that they dealt with a lot. Freud himself, again, to remind the audience, Frankl was a psychoanalyst. He was, for his first years, in the tradition of Adler in the tradition of Freud, and so on. And Freud was very well read, very learned. He definitely, read enough Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, and so did many others. And an important point for Nietzsche was not just the existential outlook on life, and that it has a meaning, but that we cannot take hints and marks from existing traditions. Nietzsche's criticism was specifically against Christianity, but he criticized also many other traditions. So basically, Nietzsche were to say, to make a very simple point here, we have to find the meaning of life for ourselves. We have to expose ourselves to those existential questions that come up. But if we are honest to ourselves, intellectually honest, then we cannot try to perform and adopt the answers that any given tradition was given us. So basically saying it's foolish to believe in the Christian ideas of meaning of life. Then you're just a sheep. Then you're just, a follower. Then you're just adopting a philosophy of weakness. No, you have to face yourself, the challenges, and facing the challenges, you have to be alone. You cannot rely on the solutions of others.
But that is a very hard way. And to keep Christianity aside, right?
Yes.
One of the things that even in logotherapy, and I'm going all over the place now, says is by experiencing something or encountering someone, in other words, meaning can be found not only in work, but also in love. So I think what this could also mean is a lot of people have kids. So you are born, you're told to study, then you're told to find a good job, then you're told to marry, have kids, and then your life is busy with kids and you're loving the kids. So now you're loving a person who is external to you. So you're viewing the world through their eyes, you're enjoying life through them, you're getting into trouble because they do something foolish.
Yes.
And now you spend pretty good amount of time with them and then their kids and so on and so forth. So if you look at the traditional way we were supposed to live, that's a much simpler and an easier way. So why would we not follow that? And let's say if you'd use an alternative world, let's say in my case, I don't have kids. Now that is more of a question that, okay, I can earn money, I can grow, but then what? I can travel, but then what, right? And now that is where I have enough time to sit and think, what's the meaning of life? Whereas if I had 2 kids, I wouldn't have time to do anything, right? Like, wouldn't that make it easier? Come back to what Nietzsche says, not to follow the standard?
No, it wouldn't, because it doesn't relieve you of a possibility to really tap into something. And obviously I work with people intimately for many years already, and there are many people that I came across who didn't know exactly what to do with their life and entertained the thought, oh, maybe I should have kids. Maybe that would absolve me of this burden of what to do with myself. Right. And some of them then do, and then it fails. This is
how would it fail? Is it because the kids
because then you have kids and then you don't feel anything? It's not that you have a kid and then the purpose and meaning of life button switches on and you tapped into the ancient long power source, or whatever that is. That is the hope.
And now you're screwed, because now you can't return it either, right? So now you're
you cannot return it. Of course you're occupied, you're busy. But to be busy is something different than to have a purpose and to tap into that which builds you up with, gives your perspective to life and so on. So, and this is kind of the criticism that Nietzsche would have had, is you cannot be a copy. You cannot be a copy of someone else. You cannot live the life of someone else and hope to reap the same rewards that they got from their way. It simply doesn't work.
So then what is he saying in that sense then? Is he saying, so let's take for me, for example, I don't know how long, but it's been quite a while that I've been trying to find something which gives me more purpose. And I've been trying different things on and off, here and there, whatever. And with COVID coming through, it seems like more and more people, just to give you an idea, one of the kids I was interviewing from school for a job, I asked her, what is she looking to do? And she said she wants to do something meaningful. What is it that we do at my workplace, which is meaningful? Yes. And I was pretty surprised with that question, coming from someone who is barely 21. Asking if we do something which is meaningful. And that goes back to a lot of other people. If you ask them today, they want to do something meaningful. There's a small percentage who want to make a lot of money and then figure out everything later, but a majority of them want to do something meaningful. So now this question is coming all the way, or it is going back all the way to that level, maybe because we don't have to worry about food or stay or something. So how do we then now navigate this?
Yes, and here it's important to look at the details in this. And here I would distinguish two levels. One level is what having a meaning does to us. Having a meaning to life does to us, what benefits we get from this. And this is something that Frankl focuses on. He describes many cases of how having a meaning can turn around someone's life, how it gives them the strength and the love to carry on and so forth, right? And he goes into detail into this. I would distinguish this from a phenomenon that we have today a lot, which is people who want to have a purpose. It's a self-imposed kind of ideal. It's something on the bucket list to, kind of make a satire out of it. Okay, plant a tree, finding a meaning in life. Let me go on a pilgrimage. Let me spend a week in an ashram. Let me do a soul search seminar, something like this, which is driven not by the insight of what a purpose in life can give me. It's driven by the hope, which is not something that I have. I envision something. I imagine that getting this would make me fulfilled. And
correct.
This is something
I think you're correct with that.
That is a feature that we have in so many aspects in our lives. From the simplest, most crude form of capitalism, if I think that if I have this car, I will be fulfilled. If I think I have this position or this amount of money, I will be fulfilled, is obviously, the most kind of primitive implementation of the promises of capitalism, up to if I have this lover, if I have this partner, if I have children, which is maybe a little bit more subtle. And then the spiritual version, if I were a good meditator, if I were to find a meaning in life, if I were to love myself or something like this, these subtle ideas, then I would be fulfilled. All of these have in common something that we discussed many conversations ago, this imaginary aspect of our mind. Our mind creates a projection. It's fascinated by this projection of what this image would be, and imagines that if it were to incorporate it, it would be a reflection of this perfected image that it had, which is then the carrot that I run after. And some people do that for many years, to run after a carrot that they never seem to fully catch.
Okay, so then coming back to that point, right? And before I jump into this other one,
yes.
If that is not what we are to do, which you and I had multiple discussions on that, if that is not which we are to do, not to run after the carrot, then every now and again, when you think of this question, I don't know whether your consciousness is asking you or whether you're just sitting and getting bored, because obviously when you're happy and traveling and you're having a great time, where when I'm in the middle of a very exciting event, does it come up that, are you doing something meaningful? This only comes up when I'm sitting and I'm bored. So when this question does come up, what are we supposed to say? Maybe I'm getting bored. Let me do something fun, and continue living your life and know that, there is no specific purpose or any meaning to life in itself, other than just have fun and be nice to other people. And then one day you just die. Is that what you do, or like what would you recommend people to do who have these kind of questions?
Well, first of all, I would say it's kind of obvious that we have to go through iterations and phases. So my very first answer would be try it. Maybe for you it's not a carrot. Go and do work at an NGO. Maybe it works for you, right? Because who am I to know? I don't know.
So you're saying give it a shot to figure out whether this is something that is coming in boredom, or this is something which is real. You need to do something about it. So gather up the guts to say, screw it, I'm going to leave my job and work at an NGO or do part-time, whatever it feels like, and give it a shot and see if that helps you fulfill you or something?
Ideally, do it in a way that is not too invasive. Maybe you can
Yeah.
start kind of volunteering on the weekends so that you don't do drastic measures of kind of getting rid of your livelihood or something like this before you can commit. Give it a try and see how it feels like. And then if you feel the spark and the fulfillment and the satisfaction that comes with that, then obviously it makes sense to take a slightly bigger risk or to jump into it, take a sabbatical and just do the NGO work or something like this.
And what about people who have no clue? Like, let's say someone feels that doing some NGO work may help them. And what about people who have no clue of what could help? What do they do?
Well, and here we come to a point where I would convey to people there is no algorithm.
Okay. There is no copy paste, as you were saying.
Yes. And if someone comes and tells me I have no inner antenna, no inner sensor whatsoever that would kind of direct me a little bit into any direction, right? Is it to teach children? Is it to work with domestic abuse women? Is it to organize microcredits to farmers? If there's someone who says, look, I have zero clue, my insight gives me no clue whatsoever, I would have to tell them, look, this is difficult. I don't think that you have high chances to accidentally stumble into your purpose of life. And I think that's honest. I don't think that there's a...
So what do they do then? Get on antidepressants?
Well, no, step by step. Then, if you're at that stage, then it's really to, and maybe this is something that Frankl also had in mind, create experiences. Create experiences, develop some sort of self-care, develop a rapport with your inside, with your unconscious. So there are some ways to create a fertile soil within yourself to just increase the probability that you might resonate with something, which is really baby steps.
Or maybe like you try 5 different things and see which interests you.
See what happens.
Yeah.
I would caution them about, being idealistic and having too much of this imaginary register, this imaginary mode. So don't get carried away. Be patient. When you see someone having, found their purpose of life in helping disabled children, don't think that it necessarily has to be you. Try it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Be patient, observe yourself, get a rapport with yourself, so that to develop those first bits of those antenna that might help you in the long run to at least find something that is more meaningful to you. Don't get hung up on this super big question, the meaning of life. Find fields of relevance where you can spend some time with and develop yourself.
Yeah. And just so I tried that too a couple of times to help disabled children. I got even more depressed than anything at the end of it. And it was very tiring and exhausting. And I don't know how people do it, but it was very exhausting. So
okay, but it's great that you tried, right? It's only it's only painful if you put all your eggs in that basket. It's like, okay, I will try something classically kind of traditionally meaningful. And if that doesn't work, then I give up. No, you try it, you learn from it, you find out something about yourself, that you need something more encouraging and uplifting and so on, and then you try the next thing.
Right. So on that, and a segue from that is another thing that I want to read in the book, right? So what is also happening is me and a lot of people that I spoke to who also I recommended this book to was how we were trained, and Frankl talks about that, and I'll read it, how we, or especially me and my generation, was trained in finding usefulness, or the Western culture of finding usefulness. Yes. So the question is what you are doing useful? Are you useful, right? If you grow to a certain title, or if you grow to a certain position, or you make certain money, or you're successful, for example, then you feel you're useful, you're adding value to society. And if you don't, then you feel that you're whatever, whether you live or you die, it doesn't matter. Yes. So in this book, what he's saying is the usefulness is usually defined in terms of functioning for the benefit of society, right? So am I adding any value to society? If I'm not, then I'm not useful. But today's society is characterized by achievement orientation. And consequently, it adores people who are successful and happy. And in particular, it adores the young. It virtually ignores the value of all those who are otherwise, and in so doing, blurs the decisive difference between being value in the sense of dignity
Yes.
and being valuable in the sense of usefulness. Does that make sense to you in terms of what he's saying? I mean, my interpretation of that is to say, you know, my usefulness is if I was able to take care of my aging parents, or if I was able to take care of my friend while he needed me. But all that is not visibly available on, you know, social networks. So people probably don't know what I have done or what I am doing to help other people. And you know, the outside of me is whatever I am on LinkedIn or in my company. So what they're saying is think about usefulness in terms of where are you adding value and who are you adding value to, maybe if it is not just a title or something. But what do you think he's trying to mention when he talks about usefulness, and how should people look at that?
Well, I would go further than that. There is something in what you say that basically to extend one's idea of value from creating value for the company or for society to more fields that are not as tangible and measurable. The value that I give to my friends because I make them happy. The value that I give as a son, as a father, you know, to my family because I'm there for them, right? So this is certainly one level that makes it more subtle, my value. But there is the root for much more kind of pervasive criticism there. And to remind the audience, he wrote this in the mid 40s. So what sounds like, you know, a criticism that would be just as applicable today is you know, basically 80 years ago. And a contemporary of his, Theodor Adorno, he was a also Jewish philosopher who was very kind of radical in his criticism of capitalist society back then in Germany and in Europe and in the US. And for him, it was not so much to see also value in less tangible, you know, fields of life like friendships and so on, but to see value as such in being. And this is something that people struggle with today, and where a lot of kind of the topic that we have of self-love, you know, that obviously has been prominent in the last few years, this is the attempt to regain that. I don't want to be just for other people. So forget work, right? Forget kind of being functional and utilitarian for society. I also want to be a value for myself apart from my partner. I don't want to be just the partner. I don't want to be just the kid, just the father, just the friend. I want to feel it for myself that I have value. Right?
Okay.
So that's even more subtle. I don't want to get value just because I do something for other people. I want to be.
So how do you get value if you don't do anything for anyone and you're just living for yourself?
Well, a value for myself, yes. I mean, not to say that I'm doing just that. I'm becoming whatever recluse and I'm happily living for myself, within myself, but not to be dependent on the value that I create for society, create for my partner, create for my friends. Because then inside I'm hollow, then I'm empty. Then whenever I feel lonely, I feel empty, I feel bad, I need to grab the phone, I need to talk to someone, I need to make someone laugh, I need to be sexy for someone, and only then, again, I feel that I'm worthy. And I want to be free of that. I want to be able to feel fulfilled for myself without creating benefit in any way.
So coming back to that, and what you just said, that is harder to do. I mean, I haven't been able to do that for myself, so I don't know how easy that is to do. But you know, from his perspective, what he's saying is how society looks and makes people feel not valued, versus how you are of some value, even though you're doing things for others, you're of value. So you can look at yourself and say, well, you know, if I'm making money, I'm also donating here. I'm also helping person A, B, and C at work to get to the next level. Although at the end of it, none of that makes any sense to anyone because all of us are going to die anyways. But then if we come to the subtle level that you mentioned, where you should feel valuable for yourself, even, and not have a not have a complete dependency on, I need to do something for my parents or my wife or my kids to be valuable. How do you get to that? Because he didn't mention that in the book yet, but I think you have a point. How do you get there?
Yes, this is, well, again, there's no simple path there, but it's basically to practice a non-judgmental attitude towards oneself. This is maybe a short way to putting it.
Then that's coming back to self-love, or what do you call it, being kinder to yourself or something.
Well, I mean, so far in our conversation, I was very deconstructive, kind of emphasizing the different aspects and the dead ends, and the impossibilities to just adopt and copy paste a strategy. But to give something a little bit more positive at this point, when I do a practice of contemplation, when I observe myself, when I experience something, and bit by bit, I'm able to disempower the judge within me. And I'm able to be with the phenomenon, be it, a physical experience, be it a feeling, be it a pain, be it something nice, being sitting in the park and watching the ducks, right? And I'm able through practice to slowly just experience that and just observe without putting a value or a label or judging it in any way. Then as a result of that, relatively surely something emerges within, a feeling of contentment. It's not just an emptiness that comes, so it's like, okay, well, I sit there, nothing happens, so what, big deal, I can sit on a park bench. No, when I can, disempower this inner judge that always tries to figure out what is of value to me, or if I'm a good person in that moment, or what I should do in the next moment, all those questions, then with time, there is a contentment that emerges. And that contentment brings with it, not explicitly, it's not waving a sign of this is purpose, this is meaning, but it carries within an implicit sense of fulfillment. And to use another vocabulary, which is slightly misleading nowadays and outdated, a sense of purpose. It feels like that.
Okay, so I can take two goal aims at that, right? And I think one of them you wouldn't very much agree with is you're sitting and you're watching a duck and you're feeling content. Like whether you sit and watch a duck and feel content, whether you're alive or dead, doesn't really matter. But then to that you'll tell me no one's life really matters, and even if you destroy the entire earth, it wouldn't really matter.
Well, why does the question of mattering at that moment?
Yeah.
It completely seems to matter. Why?
At that moment, what matters is that you're feeling content and you're enjoying. So all you're doing is enjoying, right? So that is what you're doing.
To put it in philosophical terms, you enjoy your existence, yes, and you're able to
enjoy your existence. So then, should we look at just enjoying our existence? Is that what we should, or what our goal should be? And in terms of enjoying our existence, we should do the right thing, because someone may eat, some people are vegetarian, some are vegan, some love to eat beef. So if someone is eating beef and they're really enjoying themselves, then who is someone else to say, hey, you shouldn't eat it, right? Like, where does this enjoyment then stop or go? And is it all about enjoying in life then, to keep it simple?
Yes, so that's a good point to differentiate that. I don't mean an hedonistic enjoyment of, okay, the beef, and now I want some salmon, and now that is not enough, let me enjoy something. It's not the enjoyment of experiences, it's enjoying me in the experience. It's a self-satisfaction, it's self-gratifying.
Self-satisfaction and self-gratifying without becoming obsessed with it, like some people.
I'm not dependent on the ducks to give me enjoyment. I can sit in an empty room and be non-judgmental and enjoy myself.
Okay, without dependency.
That's not hedonism.
Yourself. Okay, so you're saying enjoying by yourself. But now what you're saying is, I don't want to call it bliss because that gets too far out. But what you're saying is, if you're happy just by yourself or within yourself and enjoying the moment, whether it is cold, hot, windy, dry, whatever that is, then that is what you should strive at. And then the questions around meaning in life, the usefulness, drop. So is that
Well,
Did I
always
make it too
careful with the
simple?
you should, because the you should
Okay.
automatically creates a judge,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
not in the present moment, right?
Right.
So I don't want to create another kind of goal, another obstacle, another criteria for judging myself that I have not achieved it,
Got it.
right? Because then
Yeah.
afterwards,
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
I
Then you're
give,
always thinking you didn't get it. Like when you sit and
yes,
meditate, you feel you should feel something, but 90% of
yes.
the time I don't feel anything.
Right. And then we're back
But
at square one after a week
yeah,
of trying to feel myself. And it's like, oh, what a bad, useless person I am. I was not
yeah,
able to be
feel
judgment free.
anything. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So
So I'm always
that
careful with
makes
those
sense.
conclusions.
But then, and I know we are running on time,
Mhm.
and we can probably stop at this, and then I have a couple more questions we can do in next one. But in here, then, when he talks about usefulness, what is he trying to say, or do you agree with what he's saying, or do you feel that what he's saying is partially okay and not the entire thing? Because he
Mhm.
dives deep into it, right? So and he goes about usefulness. Also, he mentions in terms of old people, and what he says is old people may not have anything to look forward to in the future, but they have done so many things in their life that they can sit back and say, oh good, I had so many opportunities, I did so many things that
Yes.
no one can take it away from me. Whereas I may be sitting here at 40 something and I'm thinking, okay, what can I do in the next 10 years which could prove to be more than I can imagine, or more valuable to the next set of generation or people or something.
Yes. So a simple understanding that I have of him, and maybe I'm oversimplifying him, but my impression is that he basically says, look, to find meaning of life is super important. I don't care how, I don't care what you believe in. It just matters that you find some purpose. If you find purpose in looking back at your life, great. If you find purpose in looking forward to the next thing to do, great. If you find purpose in helping others, super. If you find a purpose in work, be it that. Just find some meaning in life. Just find some purpose. So my sense is that he's rather, eclectic and pragmatic, and I don't mind that. I think that's cool, because if he was kind of prescriptive and telling people do this, do that, you would automatically run into the issue of people trying and failing and then being frustrated. And with kind of being that open, I think that there's more of a chance that when you actually work with people, that you are open-minded enough as the therapist to guide people to whatever their inclinations are. And maybe it's hedonistic and, traveling around the world and doing sports and having food and so on. Then it's that. If that is your purpose, if that makes you happy, good for you.
Okay. So I think that's good. So if you want, we can probably close at this today. I do have to go through the 3 tenets of logotherapy. Maybe we can do a 30-minute on that later.
Yes, sure. Let's do that.
Cool. All right, Doc, thank you very much for your time. And hopefully someone will find this useful.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.